The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the ballroom as I adjusted my bow tie one final time. Around me, 300 of the city's elite laughed and clinked glasses, their designer gowns rustling like autumn leaves. They had no idea that the man in the crisp tuxedo standing at the back of the room, the one they dismissed with barely a glance, was about to deliver the toast that would unravel everything. My fingers traced the folded papers in my jacket pocket. 27 years of secrets. 27 years of careful planning. 27 years of being invisible while gathering the kind of information that could topple dynasties. The bride radiated satisfaction from the head table, her diamond tiara catching the light as she threw back her head in laughter. She had everything she'd ever wanted now, the perfect husband, the perfect venue, the perfect audience to witness her triumph. She had climbed every rung of the social ladder with ruthless precision, leaving broken hearts and destroyed reputations in her wake. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had forgotten that janitors have keys to every door, access to every room, and ears that work perfectly well even when people pretend they're not there. The best man finished his toast to thunderous applause. The maid of honor dabbed at her eyes as she spoke about childhood memories that were mostly fabricated. Then the MC's voice boomed across the ballroom. And now, a special toast from someone who has known our beautiful bride for many, many years. I stepped forward into the light, and for the first time in decades, every eye in the room was on me. Nobody chooses to become invisible. It happens gradually, like water wearing away stone, until one day you realize that people look through you as if you were made of glass. For me, that process began at age 12 when my mother took the only job she could find after my father's construction company went bankrupt, night janitor at the most exclusive private school in the city. Westmore Academy stood like a Gothic cathedral on 50 acres of manicured grounds, its ivy-covered walls housing the children of senators, CEOs, and old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. My mother cleaned their toilets while I did homework in empty classrooms, surrounded by the ghosts of privilege I would never possess. The irony wasn't lost on me that I received a better education sitting in those empty rooms than most kids got in their overcrowded public schools. I absorbed everything, advanced mathematics from blackboards that hadn't been erased, literature discussions that continued in scribbled margin notes, science concepts that lingered in half-finished equations. Knowledge became my currency in a world where I had nothing else to trade. By day, I attended Lincoln Middle School across town, a concrete fortress where broken dreams went to die. But by night, I wandered the halls of Westmore like a scholar ghost, teaching myself from textbooks left behind by students who could afford to be careless with $100 books. It was during one of these nocturnal study sessions that I first encountered her. I was 16 then, had earned my GED early, and was working alongside my mother to save money for community college. It was past midnight when I heard voices coming from the senior lounge, a violation of school rules that would normally result in immediate expulsion. But rules bent differently for some people. Hidden behind a partially open door, I watched as 5 students sat in a circle, their faces illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen. They weren't just breaking curfew, they were orchestrating the social destruction of a classmate who had apparently crossed them. Screenshots of private messages, doctored photos, carefully crafted rumors, they wielded social media like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devastating. At the center of it all sat Christina Whitmore, even then radiating the kind of magnetic cruelty that would define her life. Her family owned half the commercial real estate in the city, but she possessed something more valuable than money, the ability to read people's weaknesses and exploit them with surgical precision. She noticed me watching. Her eyes met mine through the crack in the door, and for a moment, I thought I was caught. But instead of alarm, I saw calculation. She held my gaze for 3 heartbeats, then returned to her laptop as if I were just another piece of furniture. That night, I learned 2 crucial lessons. The wealthy don't just have more money than the rest of us, they have different rules entirely. And sometimes, being invisible is the greatest power of all. Community college led to a state university, where I studied business administration while working nights at a hotel chain. I learned to read financial statements the way others read novels, absorbing the stories hidden in balance sheets and cash flow reports. My professors saw potential in the quiet student who never missed class and always sat in the back row, but they couldn't understand why I seemed more interested in corporate structures than climbing corporate ladders. The truth was, I had discovered something fascinating about power structures in America. They weren't built to keep people out as much as they were designed to keep people from seeing how they really worked. And the best way to see clearly was to remain invisible. After graduation, I could have pursued a conventional career path. My grades were excellent, my work ethic unquestionable. But conventional paths were for people who wanted to be seen, and I had learned the value of existing in the spaces between notice and neglect. I took a job with Pinnacle Services, a commercial cleaning company that serviced the city's most exclusive buildings. Not as a janitor initially, but as an operations coordinator responsible for quality control and client relations. It was the perfect position, respectable enough to explain to my mother, invisible enough to grant me access to the inner workings of power. The job required me to visit dozens of high-end locations, law firms where partners discussed strategy in conference rooms they assumed were empty, investment banks where traders celebrated illegal schemes after hours, political offices where deals were made that would never appear in any official record. But it was the private clubs and exclusive venues that provided the richest intelligence. These were the spaces where the city's elite gathered to be themselves, dropping the public facades they wore during business hours. They spoke freely about their affairs, their schemes, their genuine opinions about the people they smiled at during the day. I developed a system for cataloging this information. Not for any specific purpose initially, just the habit of a man who had learned that knowledge was the only currency that couldn't be stolen. Names, dates, connections, secrets. I stored it all in an encrypted database that grew larger every year. My apartment filled with filing cabinets and computer equipment that seemed incongruous with my modest salary. I told my few acquaintances that I was working on a novel, which wasn't entirely untrue. I was writing a story, just not the kind that would ever be published. It was during this period that Christina Whitmore reappeared in my life. I was conducting a routine inspection at the Meridian Club, one of the city's oldest and most exclusive private institutions, when I spotted her at a corner table in the main dining room. She had graduated from Westmore Academy 5 years earlier and had apparently spent the intervening time cultivating the same ruthless charm I remembered from her teenage years. She was 23 then, engaged to a junior partner at her father's law firm, a pleasant but unremarkable man who clearly adored her. But even from across the room, I could see that she was already growing bored with him. Her attention kept drifting to a silver-haired man at a nearby table, someone old enough to be her father, but wealthy enough to make age irrelevant. Over the following months, I observed the careful orchestration of her romantic transition. The gradual cooling toward her fiancé, the accidental encounters with the older man, the perfectly timed breakup that left her free to console herself with someone who could offer her access to social circles her family's money alone couldn't buy. She had evolved into something magnificent and terrible, a master manipulator who understood that the right connections were more valuable than the right credentials. Within 2 years, she had married and divorced the silver-haired man, walking away with a settlement that made her independently wealthy and connections that opened doors throughout the city's power structure. But she wasn't finished climbing. Her second marriage was to the son of a pharmaceutical fortune, a union that lasted exactly long enough to establish her credentials in medical charity circles and provide her with the kind of tragic backstory that made people forgive her calculated ambitions. The divorce was amicable, she explained to sympathetic friends. They had simply grown apart, wanted different things from life. By her third engagement, I had been watching her for nearly a decade. She had perfected her technique, becoming a social chameleon who could adapt to any environment while always maneuvering toward greater advantage. She collected powerful men the way some people collected art, appreciating their value while remaining fundamentally detached from them as human beings. Her latest target was perhaps her most ambitious yet, Marcus Blackstone, heir to a media empire that controlled newspapers, television stations, and digital platforms across 3 states. He was handsome enough, intelligent enough, and most importantly, positioned to inherit the kind of influence that could reshape entire industries. I watched her courtship of Marcus with the fascination of an anthropologist studying a particularly sophisticated predator. She had learned to deploy vulnerability as a weapon, sharing carefully curated stories about her past relationships that painted her as a woman seeking genuine connection after too many disappointments with shallow men. Marcus, for his part, seemed genuinely smitten. He was 32, had never been married, and apparently believed he had found someone who loved him for himself rather than his family's fortune. It was almost touching in its naivety. The engagement was announced in the society pages with the kind of breathless coverage usually reserved for royal weddings. Christina had finally secured her position at the apex of the city's social hierarchy, and she intended to celebrate accordingly. Which is how I found myself, 6 months later, standing in the service corridor of the city's most exclusive hotel, adjusting a rented tuxedo and preparing to attend the wedding of the century. The Grandview Ballroom occupied the entire 40th floor of the Hamilton Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city sprawling below. It was a venue that existed specifically to remind people of their place in the hierarchy. Those who could afford to rent it looked down on everyone else, literally and figuratively. I had legitimate reasons to be there. Pinnacle Services had been contracted to provide additional cleaning staff for the event, and as operations coordinator, my presence was both expected and unremarkable. The hotel's regular staff knew me, the caterers recognized me from other events, and the wedding party saw through me as if I were part of the architecture. It was perfect cover for what I really came to do. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of orchestrated emotion. Christina had chosen a designer gown that managed to be both traditional and avant-garde, a creation that would be photographed from every angle and discussed in fashion magazines for months to come. Marcus waited at the altar with the kind of nervous joy that comes from believing you've found your soulmate. I positioned myself near the back of the ballroom, ostensibly supervising the cleaning crew but actually observing the gathering of the city's most powerful families. It was like watching a nature documentary about apex predators, beautiful, fascinating, and utterly ruthless beneath the civilized veneer. The guest list read like a who's who of regional influence. There were governors and senators, CEOs and federal judges, old money and new money united in their shared assumption that the world existed for their benefit. They air-kissed and exchanged pleasantries while their eyes constantly calculated advantage and opportunity. But I wasn't there for them. I was there for Christina, and for the moment when her carefully constructed facade would finally crumble. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Christina delivered her vows with the perfect blend of emotion and composure, her voice never wavering as she promised to love, honor, and cherish a man she had already begun planning to destroy. Marcus spoke from the heart, his genuine feelings on display for everyone to see and her to exploit. It was during the cocktail hour that I first noticed the looks. I was standing near the service entrance when a group of Christina's college friends gathered nearby, their conversation flowing around me as if I were invisible. They spoke in the casual cruelty of people who had never faced real consequences for their words. "I still can't believe she's going through with this," one of them said, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard over the ambient noise. "Marcus is sweet, but he's so earnest. Can you imagine Christina married to someone who actually believes in love?" Another woman laughed. "Give her 2 years. 3 at most. She'll get bored and find some reason to paint herself as the victim. She always does. Remember what she did to Jonathan Archer? Poor man still hasn't recovered from their divorce. She took half his assets and somehow convinced everyone he was the problem. I knew about Jonathan Archer. I had files on Jonathan Archer. Christina's second husband had made the mistake of genuinely falling in love with her, and she had used that vulnerability to extract a settlement that left him emotionally and financially devastated. The last I had heard, he was working as a financial consultant in a smaller city, having never fully recovered from the public humiliation of their divorce proceedings. But these women weren't just gossiping. They were issuing a warning that would never be delivered directly to Marcus, a cautionary tale shared in the shadows while they smiled and applauded the bride at every public moment. As the evening progressed and the alcohol flowed more freely, the conversations became increasingly candid. I moved through the ballroom like a ghost, invisible to the guests who spoke freely in my presence. Near the bar, 2 men in expensive suits discussed a business deal that was clearly illegal, their voices low but not low enough. At a corner table, a judge's wife complained about having to attend charity events with those people, her casual racism delivered with the kind of smile that made it seem like friendly conversation. And throughout it all, Christina held court like a queen at her coronation, graciously accepting congratulations while her eyes constantly scanned the room for useful connections and potential threats. I was refilling water glasses at a table near the head table when she finally noticed me. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned. Her perfect smile flickered, just for an instant, before returning full force. But that momentary lapse told me everything I needed to know. She remembered the boy who had watched her orchestrate a classmate's destruction all those years ago. She remembered the janitor's son who had seen behind her mask when she was still learning to wear it. And she was wondering what else I might have seen in all the years since. The dinner service concluded without incident, and the evening moved into its final phase. The band played while couples danced, their movements elegant and practiced, each step a carefully choreographed display of social position. I had been monitoring the situation from my position near the service corridor when the wedding coordinator approached me with a clipboard and a harried expression. "We have a problem with the toast schedule," she said, her voice tight with the kind of stress that comes from managing events where every detail has been scrutinized by people accustomed to perfection. The best man is apparently too drunk to deliver his speech coherently, and the maid of honor just informed me that she's having a panic attack in the ladies' room. I nodded sympathetically while my mind raced through possibilities. Mrs. Blackstone specifically requested that all the toasts be delivered as planned, the coordinator continued. She said it was important for the photos and the videographer. Do you know if anyone else was supposed to speak? This was the moment I had been waiting for without knowing it. 27 years of careful observation, of cataloging secrets and connections, of remaining invisible while powerful people revealed their true selves. All of it had led to this single opportunity. Actually, I said, reaching into my jacket pocket and pulling out a folded piece of paper, I was asked to prepare a toast as well. Something from the perspective of someone who has known the bride for many years. The coordinator's relief was palpable. She didn't question my authority or ask for credentials. In a crisis, any solution becomes the right solution. Oh, thank goodness. When can you be ready? I'm ready now. 10 minutes later, I stood at the podium facing 300 of the most powerful people in the city. The microphone felt solid in my hand, the lights warm on my face, the audience expectant and slightly drunk on champagne and their own importance. Christina sat at the head table, her smile frozen in place, but her eyes sharp with a wariness that hadn't been there earlier. Marcus beamed beside her, clearly pleased that someone else wanted to honor his new wife. I unfolded my papers and looked out at the sea of faces, judges and politicians, business leaders and social influencers, all of them united in their assumption that they were untouchable. Good evening, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's excellent sound system. My name is David Chin, and I've had the unique privilege of knowing Christina for many, many years. A polite smattering of applause rippled through the crowd. Christina's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. You see, I've been working in the service industry for most of my adult life, which has given me an unusual perspective on our city's most prominent families. I've cleaned the offices where deals are made, maintained the clubs where connections are forged, and serviced the venues where celebrations like this one take place. I paused, letting the implications of my words settle over the audience. Some of them were beginning to look uncomfortable, though they couldn't yet articulate why. In that capacity, I've been privileged to observe Christina's remarkable journey from a promising young woman at Westmore Academy to the accomplished bride we celebrate tonight. And what a journey it has been. Christina's color had begun to drain from her face, but she maintained her composure with admirable skill. I remember Christina as a teenager, already showing the kind of strategic thinking that would serve her so well in later life. I recall one particular evening when she and her friends orchestrated the social destruction of a classmate who had apparently crossed them. The precision was remarkable, the careful deployment of social media, the strategic spread of rumors, the methodical isolation of their target until she was forced to transfer schools. The ballroom had gone completely quiet now. Even the servers had stopped moving. That classmate was Sarah Morrison, daughter of Judge Morrison, who I believe is here tonight. I nodded toward a table where an elderly man in a bow tie had gone rigid with recognition. Sarah Morrison had attempted suicide after the campaign against her, though she had ultimately survived and rebuilt her life in another state. But that was just the beginning of Christina's education in the arts of influence and manipulation. Over the years, I've had the opportunity to observe her masterful career as she married and divorced some of our city's most prominent men. Marcus had stopped smiling. The color was draining from his face as he began to understand what was happening. Take Jonathan Archer, for instance. Christina's second husband was genuinely devoted to her, but she grew bored with his earnestness. I was cleaning the offices at Morrison, Blake and Associates when she met with her divorce attorney to discuss strategy. She had already opened separate bank accounts, transferred assets, and begun documenting instances of alleged emotional abuse that existed only in her imagination. Several people at the judge's table were now whispering urgently among themselves. Or consider her brief marriage to pharmaceutical heir David Westbrook. Christina married him specifically to gain access to medical charity circles, then orchestrated their divorce to coincide with a major donation that would guarantee her position on several hospital boards. She even timed the announcement of their separation to maximize sympathy at a crucial fundraising gala. I looked directly at Christina, who sat frozen like a deer in headlights. But perhaps most impressive was her relationship with Senator Harrison's chief of staff, Marcus Wellington. Christina never married Marcus Wellington, but she didn't need to. A carefully orchestrated affair, complete with photographs and recordings, gave her the kind of political leverage that money alone can't buy. The senator's table erupted in whispered conversation. Marcus Wellington had been instrumental in several controversial pieces of legislation, and the suggestion of blackmail added a new dimension to those political battles. You see, Christina understood something that many people never grasp. Information is the ultimate currency. She collected secrets the way some people collect art, appreciating their beauty while understanding their practical value. I paused to take a sip of water, giving the audience time to absorb what they were hearing. Which brings us to tonight's groom, Marcus Blackstone. Marcus, you seem like a genuinely decent man, and I'm sure Christina cares for you in her own way. But I feel compelled to share some information that might be relevant to your future happiness. Marcus was gripping the edge of the table now, his knuckles white with tension. 3 weeks ago, Christina met with a private investigator to discuss your family's business practices. She's been building a file on the Blackstone Media Group's financial irregularities, including the tax avoidance schemes your father implemented in the Caribbean and the quid pro quo arrangements with several political candidates. The Blackstone family table had gone completely silent. She's also been in regular contact with your business rival, Harold Symington, discussing what she calls a strategic partnership that would begin after an appropriate waiting period following your inevitable divorce. I folded my papers and looked out at the stunned faces before me. So let me raise a toast to Christina Blackstone, a woman who has turned marriage into a business strategy and manipulation into an art form. She has used her intelligence, her beauty, and her complete lack of conscience to climb to the very top of our city's social hierarchy. In a society that rewards ruthlessness and punishes genuine emotion, she is the perfect success story. I raised my champagne glass. To Christina, may she finally get everything she deserves. The silence that followed was profound and absolute. 300 people sat frozen, unsure how to react to the systematic destruction they had just witnessed. Christina stood slowly, her composure finally cracking. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly, but her eyes burned with the kind of rage that comes from being truly exposed. "You're lying," she said, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. This is slander. You can't prove any of this." I smiled and pulled out my phone. "Actually, I can. You see, Christina, you made one crucial mistake over all these years. You forgot that janitors have access to every room, every conversation, every moment when you thought you were safe to be yourself." I touched the screen, and her voice filled the ballroom through the sound system, a recording of her phone conversation with Harold Symington from just 2 weeks earlier, discussing the timeline for their business partnership and her confidence that Marcus would be easy to manage until she was ready to move on. The recording played for 30 seconds before I shut it off. In that brief time, Christina's entire carefully constructed world collapsed around her. Marcus stood and walked out without a word. Half the wedding party followed him. Several other guests began making quiet exits, unwilling to be associated with the scandal that was already spreading through the room like wildfire. Christina looked around desperately, searching for allies or escape routes, but finding neither. The people who had courted her favor now avoided her gaze, calculating how to distance themselves from the wreckage. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the murmur of shocked conversations. I walked down from the podium and stopped in front of her table. "I'm the janitor's son you dismissed all those years ago. I'm the invisible man who cleaned up after your schemes and listened to your confessions. I'm the person you never bothered to notice because you assumed I didn't matter." I leaned closer, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. "But mostly, Christina, I'm the one who's been taking notes." The aftermath unfolded with the inexorable logic of a controlled demolition. By morning, the recording of Christina's conversation with Harold Symington had been anonymously sent to every major media outlet in the city. By afternoon, 3 separate investigations had been launched into the various allegations I had raised during my toast. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, monitoring news coverage while organizing the evidence I had collected over nearly 3 decades. The files filled 17 bankers' boxes, photographs, recordings, financial documents, correspondence, and detailed notes on conversations overheard in supposedly private spaces. The media feeding frenzy was spectacular. Christina's story had all the elements that journalists craved: wealth, scandal, betrayal, and the downfall of someone who had seemed untouchable. But more importantly, her exposure had opened the door to broader investigations into the networks of corruption and influence trading that she had navigated so skillfully. Judge Morrison's connection to the real estate deals that had enriched his family while he presided over zoning cases. Senator Harrison's chief of staff's role in legislation that benefited companies that had secretly funded his lifestyle. The pharmaceutical companies that had used Christina's charity connections to influence medical research funding. Each revelation led to another, like pulling a thread that unraveled an entire tapestry of institutional corruption. Marcus Blackstone handled the situation with more grace than anyone had expected. Rather than retreating into privacy, he held a press conference 3 days after the wedding to announce that his family's media companies would be conducting a comprehensive investigation into their own business practices, including the tax avoidance schemes Christina had uncovered. "My family built this company on the principle that information should serve the public interest," he said, standing before a battery of cameras and microphones. "If we've lost sight of that principle, then it's time to return to our founding values." It was a masterful piece of public relations that transformed him from a victim into a reformer, someone willing to clean house rather than cover up. The stock price of Blackstone Media actually rose in the days following his announcement, as investors rewarded what they saw as proactive transparency. Christina, meanwhile, had vanished. She had left the hotel that night without speaking to anyone, her designer gown trailing behind her like the remnants of a fairy tale turned nightmare. Her apartment was empty by the next morning, her bank accounts closed, her phone disconnected. Some said she had fled to Europe, where she maintained connections through her previous marriages. Others speculated that she had retreated to a family property in the Caribbean, waiting for the scandal to die down before attempting to rebuild her reputation. But I knew better. Christina Whitmore had spent her entire adult life creating strategic relationships and backup plans. She wouldn't run away, she would regroup, adapt, and return with a new strategy for regaining power. The question was whether I would be ready for her when she did. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I sat in my newly renovated office on the 20th floor of a downtown high-rise, reviewing applications for the investigative journalism fellowship I had established with an anonymous donation. The David Chin Institute for Accountability Reporting had attracted submissions from journalists across the country, all of them proposing projects that would shine light into the dark corners of institutional power. The transformation of my own life had been as dramatic as any of the stories I had helped expose. The evidence I had provided to various law enforcement agencies had resulted in a dozen indictments, 3 resignations from public office, and reforms to the city's ethics oversight process. More importantly, it had established my reputation as someone who understood how power really worked in America. Consulting requests poured in from law firms, media companies, and advocacy organizations. They wanted my expertise in tracing the invisible networks that connected wealth, influence, and corruption. They were willing to pay handsomely for knowledge that had taken me 30 years to accumulate. But money had never been the point. The point had been to prove that being invisible didn't mean being powerless. My assistant knocked on the door and entered with a stack of mail and a concerned expression. "Mr. Chin, there's something you should see," she said, placing a cream-colored envelope on my desk. This was delivered by courier, no return address. The envelope was expensive, the kind of stationery used by people who understood that presentation matters as much as content. My name was written across the front in elegant script that I recognized immediately. Inside was a single photograph, Christina standing on the deck of a yacht, her hair longer than it had been at the wedding, her skin tanned from what appeared to be months in the sun. She was smiling, but not the calculated smile I remembered from her society appearances. This was something more genuine, almost predatory. On the back of the photograph, she had written a single line, "The game isn't over." I studied the image more carefully. The yacht was clearly expensive, probably 60 feet or longer. The background showed what appeared to be a Mediterranean coastline, though I couldn't identify the specific location. But what caught my attention were the other figures visible at the edges of the frame, 2 men in expensive casual wear, their faces partially obscured, but their postures suggesting wealth and confidence. Christina hadn't fled in defeat. She had found new targets. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had memorized but never used, a contact at the State Department who specialized in tracking American citizens abroad when their activities might threaten national security interests. "Agent Martinez, this is David Chin. I think we need to talk." The meeting took place in a nondescript office building in Washington, D.C., 3 floors below street level in a room that officially didn't exist. Agent Martinez was a compact woman in her 40s with the kind of focused intensity that came from years of tracking people who didn't want to be found. "Christina Whitmore has been on our radar for 8 months, she said, sliding a thick folder across the conference table. ever since she started attending social events in Monaco and the French Riviera. The file contained surveillance photographs, financial records, and intelligence reports that painted a picture of someone who had learned from her mistakes. Christina had abandoned her previous strategy of targeting individual wealthy men in favor of something more ambitious. She was positioning herself as a facilitator for international business deals that existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal. She's calling herself a cultural liaison specialist, Martinez continued. Her company, Mediterranean Strategic Consulting, supposedly helps American businesses navigate European social customs and regulatory environments. I flipped through photographs of Christina at various high-end events, always positioned near men whose faces I recognized from international business magazines. Arms dealers, energy executives, pharmaceutical researchers working on questionable projects, the kind of people who needed someone with social skills and flexible ethics to help them build relationships. The problem is that several of these cultural exchanges appear to involve technology transfers that violate international sanctions. She's not just facilitating social connections, she's helping American companies sell restricted technology to countries that shouldn't have access to it. Agent Martinez pulled out a separate folder marked with classification stamps I didn't recognize. 3 weeks ago, she attended a party on a yacht owned by Dmitry Volkov, a Russian oligarch who's been sanctioned by both the EU and the United States. The guest list included executives from 2 American defense contractors and a researcher from a biotechnology firm that specializes in dual-use technologies. I studied the surveillance photos, noting how Christina had positioned herself at the center of every conversation, her body language suggesting intimate familiarity with people she had supposedly just met. She's evolved, I said. Before, she was targeting individual men for personal gain. Now she's leveraging her skills to facilitate international criminal activity. Exactly. And because she's an American citizen operating in international waters and foreign jurisdictions, it's incredibly difficult to build a prosecutable case against her. We need someone who understands her methods, her psychology, her weaknesses. Agent Martinez leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on mine. We need someone she trusts enough to get close to. Someone she would never suspect of working with law enforcement. The implication was clear. They wanted me to go undercover, to use my history with Christina to gain access to her operation. It was dangerous, potentially illegal, and would require me to abandon the quiet life I had built since the wedding scandal. It was also the logical next step in a game that had been building for 30 years. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Christina's operation relies on her ability to read people, to identify their weaknesses and exploit them. But you're the one person who's ever successfully surprised her. You understand her better than she understands herself. Martinez pulled out another file, this one containing detailed dossiers on Christina's current associates. We want you to approach her as a potential client. You've established yourself as an expert on corruption and influence networks, exactly the kind of knowledge that would be valuable to someone facilitating illegal international deals. I considered the proposal. The risks were enormous, but so was the potential impact. Christina had escaped consequences for her domestic crimes by fleeing the country, but her new activities threatened national security interests that went far beyond personal revenge. I'll need complete operational control, I said. No interference from your people. No predetermined outcomes. If I'm going to convince her that I'm genuinely interested in joining her operation, I need the freedom to make decisions in real time. Agreed. And I want immunity for any activities I undertake in the course of this operation. I can't be effective if I'm worried about prosecution for crimes committed in service of this investigation. Agent Martinez hesitated, then nodded. I'll need to clear that with my superiors, but I think we can arrange something. I closed the files and stood to leave. One more thing, I said. When this is over, when we've gathered enough evidence to bring down her entire network, I get to be the one who tells her how it happened. Mr. Chin, this is a national security operation, not a personal vendetta. I smiled. Agent Martinez, after 30 years of watching Christina destroy people's lives without consequences, I think I've earned the right to deliver the final toast. The approach had to be perfect. Too aggressive and Christina would smell a trap. Too subtle, and she might not take the bait. I spent 3 weeks crafting a profile that would appeal to her new interests while explaining my sudden appearance in her world. David Chin, corruption consultant, had supposedly grown tired of exposing scandals for the benefit of others. The wedding toast that had destroyed Christina's domestic operations had also established my reputation as someone who understood the hidden networks of power and influence. Foreign clients were offering substantial sums for that expertise, and I was ready to explore more lucrative applications of my knowledge. The initial contact came through intermediaries, a Swiss banking contact who mentioned my availability to a Monaco-based businessman who occasionally worked with Mediterranean strategic consulting. Within 2 weeks, I received an invitation to a private dinner party aboard a yacht anchored off the coast of Nice. The yacht was everything I had expected, 200 feet of understated luxury that could house a small army while maintaining the appearance of a wealthy businessman's toy. The guest list was deliberately small, 8 people carefully chosen to represent different aspects of Christina's evolving operation. She had changed since the wedding. The obvious calculation was still there, but tempered with something that resembled genuine confidence rather than desperate ambition. She moved through the gathering with the ease of someone who had finally found her true calling, not as a social climber seeking acceptance, but as a power broker who commanded respect through competence rather than manipulation. When she spotted me across the deck, her expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and finally something that might have been genuine pleasure. "David Chin," she said, approaching with 2 glasses of champagne. "I wondered when you might surface in more interesting circles. Christina, you look successful." She laughed, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of who she might have been if she had chosen a different path. Success is relative. But yes, I found that my particular skill set translates quite well to international consulting. We stood at the railing, looking out at the lights of the French Riviera while the other guests mingled behind us. It was a perfect setting for the kind of conversation that couldn't happen in more formal environments. "I heard about your wedding," I said. "I'm sorry it didn't work out. Are you?" Her smile was sharp, but not entirely unfriendly. "From what I recall, you played a rather significant role in that particular disaster. You forced my hand. The things you were planning for Marcus." "Marcus is fine. Better than fine, actually. Turns out that destroying his marriage was the best thing that ever happened to his career. He's positioned himself as a reformer, cleaned house at his family's companies, and is probably going to run for governor in 2 years. She was right, and we both knew it. Marcus Blackstone had emerged from the scandal stronger than before, while Christina had been forced to reinvent herself entirely. So what brings you to my new world?" she asked. "Last I heard, you were playing the righteous whistleblower, exposing corruption for the greater good." This was the crucial moment. Everything depended on selling her a story that was believable but not too convenient. "The greater good doesn't pay very well," I said. "And I discovered that knowledge has different values depending on how you choose to apply it." "Interesting. And what kind of application were you considering?" I pulled out my phone and showed her a photograph, one of several that Agent Martinez had provided as part of my cover story. It showed me at a dinner in London with 2 men whose faces would be familiar to anyone in Christina's line of work. Let's just say that some people are willing to pay substantial sums for information about American regulatory processes and enforcement priorities. Christina studied the photograph carefully, her expression revealing nothing. "Those are dangerous people to do business with. So are you, from what I understand." She handed me back the phone and turned to face the party behind us. "Walk with me," she said. We moved through the gathering, and Christina introduced me to the other guests with the casual efficiency of someone orchestrating a business meeting disguised as a social event. Each introduction carried subtext that would have been invisible to outsiders but was clearly significant to the people involved. There was Dmitry Volkov, the sanctioned Russian oligarch, who spoke excellent English and seemed genuinely interested in American political developments. Dr. Sarah Kim, a biotechnology researcher whose company had been quietly blacklisted by several government agencies. Marcus Webb, a defense contractor whose export licenses had been mysteriously delayed for months. Each of them represented a piece of a larger puzzle, American citizens and companies seeking ways around legal restrictions that were interfering with profitable international relationships. By the end of the evening, I had been invited to attend a more exclusive gathering the following week. A working session, Christina called it, where serious people discussed serious opportunities. As the yacht returned to harbor, she found me standing alone on the forward deck. "You know," she said, "I've spent a lot of time over the past year thinking about that night at the wedding, trying to understand how someone I had dismissed as irrelevant could know so much about my private business. And what conclusion did you reach? That I had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of power in America. I thought it flowed from wealth and social connections. But you proved that information is the real currency and that the most dangerous people are often the ones nobody notices." She moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The question is whether you've learned the same lesson about international business. The stakes are higher here, David. The people are more dangerous, and the consequences of mistakes are permanent. It was both a warning and a test. She was offering me access to her operation while making it clear that betrayal would not be tolerated. I'm a quick learner, I said. I hope so. Because if you're here for any reason other than profit, if you're still playing the righteous reformer, then you've made a very serious mistake. She handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number printed on expensive paper. Call me tomorrow. We'll discuss terms. As I watched her walk away, I realized that the game had entered an entirely new phase. Christina wasn't the desperate social climber I had exposed at her wedding. She had evolved into something far more dangerous, a competent criminal who understood exactly what she was doing and why. For the first time since Agent Martinez had approached me, I wondered if I was truly prepared for what I had committed to do. The second meeting took place in a private dining room at a restaurant in Monaco that didn't advertise and didn't accept reservations from anyone whose name wasn't already known to the owner. The 6 people seated around the mahogany table represented a combined net worth in the billions and enough classified information to destabilize governments. I had spent the intervening week establishing my credibility through carefully orchestrated demonstrations of my knowledge. A tip about an upcoming FDA investigation that allowed Dr. Kim to move her research to a more accommodating jurisdiction. Information about State Department personnel changes that helped Marcus Webb identify new contacts for his export license applications. Small favors, but ones that demonstrated both my access to inside information and my willingness to use it for profit rather than principle. Christina had positioned herself as the facilitator for all of these relationships, the social lubricant that made illegal cooperation feel like friendly collaboration. She had mastered the art of making criminal activity seem like sophisticated business strategy. The Americans have become increasingly difficult to work with directly, Dmitry Volkov was saying, his accent adding gravity to words that would have sounded mundane in any other context. Their regulatory environment has become hostile to the kind of innovation that benefits both our countries. Translation: U.S. sanctions and export controls were interfering with his ability to acquire American technology for Russian military applications. Which is where David's expertise becomes invaluable, Christina said, her voice carrying the kind of confidence that came from knowing she held all the cards. He understands not just what the regulations say, but how they're enforced, where the gaps exist, and how priorities shift based on political developments. She had positioned me as the group's early warning system, the person who could anticipate enforcement actions and regulatory changes before they became public. It was a role that required me to provide increasingly sensitive information to maintain credibility. Dr. Kim leaned forward, her expression intense. I need to know about the biosecurity initiative, she said. My company has 3 research projects that could be affected, but the published guidelines are deliberately vague. This was the moment I had been preparing for. The Biosecurity Initiative was a classified program designed to prevent dual-use biological research from being transferred to hostile nations. Providing detailed information about it would be a serious federal crime, and exactly the kind of intelligence that would cement my position in Christina's organization. I pulled out a tablet and opened a document that appeared to contain official government information. The initiative has 3 primary enforcement mechanisms, I began, sharing intelligence that Agent Martinez had carefully crafted to sound genuine while being essentially worthless to actual adversaries. First, enhanced screening of research collaborations with foreign institutions. For the next hour, I briefed the group on various government programs, sharing enough real information to maintain credibility while carefully avoiding anything that would actually compromise national security. It was a delicate balance that required constant calculation. But Christina was watching me with the kind of focused attention that suggested she suspected something was wrong. After the meeting, she asked me to stay behind while the others departed. That was impressive, she said once we were alone. Almost too impressive. Meaning that the information you just shared would be incredibly difficult for someone in your position to obtain through normal channels. I had prepared for this moment, but my response still felt crucial to the entire operation. Christina, I've been building relationships with government employees for 30 years. The same techniques I use to gather information about your business activities work just as well with federal bureaucrats. People talk when they don't think anyone important is listening. She studied my face, looking for tells that would reveal deception. And you're comfortable betraying those relationships for profit? I'm comfortable adapting to changing circumstances. The idealistic whistleblower act was good for destroying your wedding, but it's not a sustainable business model. Christina laughed, but there was something calculating in her expression. You know what I think, David? I think you're exactly what you appear to be, someone who's discovered that his principles are negotiable when the price is right. And that makes you potentially very valuable to our operation. She moved closer, her voice dropping to the intimate tone she had perfected over years of manipulation. But it also makes you potentially very dangerous. Because someone who can be bought once can usually be bought again. And I need to know that your loyalty isn't going to be available to the highest bidder. What are you proposing? A test. Something that will demonstrate your commitment to our partnership and eliminate any possibility of you changing your mind later. She handed me a sealed envelope. Inside is information about an upcoming operation that will be extremely profitable for everyone involved, but will also cross several legal lines that can't be uncrossed. Once you participate, you'll be fully committed to this organization and everything it represents. I took the envelope, feeling its weight like a physical manifestation of the moral compromises I was supposedly willing to make. When do you need my answer? Tomorrow night. There's a party aboard Dimitri's yacht. If you attend, I'll assume you're fully committed to our arrangement. If you don't. She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. As I left the restaurant, I realized that the operation had reached its most dangerous phase. To maintain my cover, I would need to appear willing to commit serious crimes while somehow avoiding actually committing them. And I would need to do it under the scrutiny of people who had survived in the international criminal underworld by being suspicious of everyone. Back in my hotel room, I opened the envelope and found details of an operation that made everything we had discussed seem minor by comparison. Christina's organization wasn't just facilitating technology transfers. They were planning to steal classified information directly from U.S. government computers and sell it to foreign intelligence services. It was the kind of crime that carried life sentences and had international implications that went far beyond anything I had imagined when this began. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed Agent Martinez's emergency number. "We have a problem," I said when she answered. "They want me to commit treason." The emergency meeting took place in a rented office space in Geneva, chosen for its proximity to both Monaco and the various intelligence agencies that were now taking an interest in Christina's operation. Agent Martinez arrived with two colleagues whose credentials she didn't bother to explain, and their expressions made it clear that the situation had escalated beyond a simple criminal investigation. "The operation you've described would compromise active intelligence assets in 3 countries, one of them said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from dealing with international security threats. "We can't allow you to participate, even as cover for this investigation." I had expected this response, but it created an impossible situation. If I don't participate, Christina will know I'm not who I claim to be. The entire operation will be blown, and she'll disappear again before you can build a case against her. "Then we'll have to accept that outcome," Martinez said. "We can't risk national security for one investigation, no matter how important." The third agent, a woman who had remained silent until now, leaned forward in her chair. "Actually, there might be another option," she said. "What if we let Christina think the operation succeeded while ensuring that no actual classified information is compromised?" She outlined a plan that was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its complexity. They would create false classified documents that appeared genuine but contained no real intelligence value. I would help Christina steal these fabricated files, establishing my credibility while providing law enforcement with documented evidence of her criminal activities. The risks were enormous. If Christina discovered the deception, she would know that I was working with U.S. intelligence agencies. If foreign intelligence services analyzed the stolen documents and identified them as fakes, they would know that the entire operation was a setup. But it was the only path forward that didn't require me to actually commit treason. "How quickly can you prepare the fake documents?" I asked. 72 hours, the unnamed agent replied. "But you'll need to delay the operation somehow. Give us time to set everything up." That evening, I returned to Christina's yacht with a story about technical complications that would require postponing the computer infiltration for several days. She accepted the delay with the kind of professional calm that suggested this wasn't her first experience with operational setbacks. "These things happen," she said, pouring wine in the yacht's elegant salon. "The important thing is that you're committed to moving forward." We were alone for the first time since the wedding, and I found myself studying her with new appreciation for how much she had changed. The desperate social climber I had exposed 18 months earlier had been replaced by someone who radiated genuine competence and confidence. "You know," she said, settling into the leather sofa across from me, I've been thinking about our history together. All those years when you were watching me, cataloging my mistakes, building the case that would eventually destroy my life. I wouldn't say it destroyed your life. You seem to have landed on your feet. True. But it did force me to confront some uncomfortable truths about who I was and what I really wanted. She took a sip of wine, her eyes fixed on mine. I spent my 20s trying to become someone I thought would be accepted by people whose approval was ultimately meaningless. I married men I didn't love, cultivated friendships with people I didn't respect, and pursued a version of success that left me feeling empty even when I achieved it. There was something unsettling about this apparent honesty, as if she were sharing genuine insights while simultaneously manipulating me in ways I couldn't detect. And now I'm doing work that actually uses my talents. I'm good at reading people, at identifying what they want and facilitating connections that benefit everyone involved. The fact that some of these activities happen to violate arbitrary legal boundaries is less important than the value they create. It was a rationalization I had heard from other criminals, the belief that their activities were justified by their outcomes, that laws were obstacles to be overcome rather than principles to be respected. But there was something else in her voice, a note of genuine satisfaction that suggested she wasn't just rationalizing her choices but had actually found something resembling fulfillment in her criminal career. Do you ever miss your old life? I asked. You mean the life where I was constantly performing for people whose respect I could never truly earn? Where every relationship was transactional and every success felt hollow? She laughed. No, David. I don't miss that life at all. She moved to the window, looking out at the lights of Monaco spread across the hillside. But I do wonder about you. Here you are, abandoning your principles for money, betraying relationships you spent decades building. Don't you feel even a little conflicted about who you're becoming? It was a test, of course. She was probing for signs of doubt or deception, looking for evidence that I wasn't as committed to this transformation as I claimed to be. Everyone compromises their principles eventually, I said. The only difference is whether you get paid for it. Spoken like someone who's finally learned how the world really works. She returned to the sofa, but this time sat closer, near enough that I could smell her perfume and see the calculation behind her apparently relaxed demeanor. There's something I need to tell you, David. Something about the operation we're planning. My heart rate accelerated, but I kept my expression neutral. The computer infiltration is just the beginning. Once we demonstrate our capability with this smaller operation, we'll have access to much larger opportunities. Foreign governments are willing to pay extraordinary sums for certain types of American intelligence, and we'll be positioned to provide it. She was describing a criminal enterprise that would operate for years, stealing and selling American secrets to hostile nations. It was exactly the kind of long-term threat that intelligence agencies were designed to prevent. How long have you been planning this? Since the wedding, actually. When you destroyed my domestic operation, you forced me to think bigger. International criminal activity has fewer restrictions and much higher profit margins. There was irony in her admission. By exposing her previous crimes, I had inadvertently created the conditions for her to graduate to much more serious criminal activity. I should thank you, she continued. If you hadn't humiliated me in front of 300 people, I might never have discovered my true calling. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But I should also warn you. This isn't the kind of business where people get to change their minds. Once you're in permanently. The only way out is retirement or death, and retirement isn't always an option. It was both an invitation and a threat, delivered with the kind of casual menace that suggested she had already crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. I realized that I was sitting across from someone who had evolved beyond the person I thought I understood. Christina Whitmore had become genuinely dangerous, and I was about to help her commit crimes that could destabilize international relationships and compromise national security. For the first time since this operation began, I wondered if the righteous janitor's son was about to get in over his head. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, its wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting creating an atmosphere more bureaucratic than dramatic. But then, most justice happens in unremarkable places, delivered by ordinary people doing extraordinary work. Christina sat at the defendant's table in a gray suit that managed to be both expensive and appropriately subdued, her lawyers flanking her like well-dressed bodyguards. She had maintained her composure throughout the 6-week trial, even as witness after witness detailed the scope of her criminal enterprise. The evidence was overwhelming. Recorded conversations, financial records, testimony from co-conspirators who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. The fake documents operation had worked perfectly. Christina had stolen and sold fabricated intelligence while providing law enforcement with documented proof of her crimes. But it was the testimony about her earlier activities that had truly sealed her fate. The systematic destruction of Sarah Morrison at Westmore Academy. The manipulative divorces that had devastated 3 different men. The blackmail schemes that had corrupted political processes and business dealings. 30 years of criminal activity finally brought to light. Judge Harrison, no relation to the senator whose administration Christina had compromised, reviewed her notes before delivering the sentence. "Ms. Whitmore," she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you have been found guilty of espionage, conspiracy to commit espionage, money laundering, and racketeering. These crimes represent not just violations of law, but betrayals of the trust that holds our society together." Christina stood to receive her sentence, her posture straight and her expression revealing nothing. "The court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison, without the possibility of parole." There was no dramatic reaction, no emotional outburst. Christina simply nodded, as if she were acknowledging the outcome of a business negotiation that hadn't gone her way. As the bailiffs moved to escort her from the courtroom, she turned and looked directly at me. For a moment, her carefully maintained composure cracked, and I saw something that might have been respect mixed with resignation. Then she was gone, led away to begin a sentence that would effectively end her life as she had known it. Outside the courthouse, Agent Martinez found me standing on the steps, watching the news crews pack up their equipment. "How do you feel?" she asked. It was a question I had been pondering for months. Christina's arrest and trial had been the culmination of a process that began when I was 12 years old, cleaning blackboards in empty classrooms at Westmore Academy. Everything that happened afterward, the wedding toast, the international investigation, the undercover operation, had been leading to this moment. "Like I finally finished something I started without knowing it," I said. Martinez nodded. "You know, in 30 years of law enforcement, I've never seen anyone play a longer game than you did. Most people want immediate results, immediate justice. But you were willing to wait decades for the right moment." She was right, though I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I had simply been a person who paid attention, who remembered what others forgot, who understood that power structures only seem permanent until someone exposes their weaknesses. "What will you do now?" she asked. I pulled out an invitation that had arrived the previous week, elegant script on expensive paper, the kind of stationery used by people who understood that presentation matters as much as content. It was from Marcus Blackstone, inviting me to attend his gubernatorial campaign launch. He had indeed emerged from the wedding scandal stronger than before, transforming himself from a media heir into a reform-minded political candidate whose personal experience with betrayal had given him credibility on issues of corruption and accountability. "I think I'll keep doing what I've always done," I said, "paying attention to people who think they're too important to be watched." Martinez smiled. "The world needs more people like you." As I walked away from the courthouse, I reflected on the strange trajectory of my life. I had begun as the invisible son of a janitor, someone who existed in the spaces between notice and neglect. But invisibility, I had learned, was not the same as powerlessness. Sometimes the most effective way to change the world is to watch carefully, remember everything, and wait for the right moment to speak. Some people build empires. Others tear them down. And a few of us do both, one toast at a time.